What is up, everybody? I'm Just Wayne and welcome to the Just Wayne Show. And today I want to talk about the backlash on Beyonce after she won Country Album of the Year and Album of the Year for Cowboy Carter. And I would like to argue that the reaction that she's getting is actually the point of the album. So without further ado, thanks for coming to my TED Talk, and let's go.
Selected by the 13,000 voting members of the Recording Academy, the Grammy goes to Cowboy Carter. Beyonce.
On this episode, I want to do three key things. I want to talk about Cowboy Carter and what it is clearly attempting to do. I want to talk about the main critiques I'm seeing of Cowboy Carter, and I want to remind everyone about what art truly is. So without further ado, let's talk about what Cowboy Carter is attempting to do, because I think it's important for us to take a major step back and remember that almost all genres of music that exist in this country are rooted in blackness. And it's Black History Month, and I know that for some folks and places you can't really celebrate Black History Month, but right here, right now on the Just Wayne Show, I'm gonna give you a little Black history. Almost every genre you know started with Black artists developing that genre and then white artists coming in and pivoting it and making it popular. It is the consistency of music history in the United States. And country music is rooted in a history of Black music. It is connected to gospel, it is connected to blues, it is connected to a whole host of genres that sprung up from Black experiences and Black artists using their Black voices. And what's so fascinating to me about Cowboy Carter is the entire album plays for me as an Afrofuturism in which Blackness is never disconnected from country. Like, country music as I know it is an extremely white genre. Now, I lived in Lexington for a long time, and bluegrass music was everywhere, and I connected country to whiteness. It's kind of like that scene in Remember the Titans where they have to get to know each other, and Ryan Gosling's character is playing, "They're gonna put me in the movies."
They're gonna put me in the movies.
Huh?
They're gonna make a big star out of me.
This one. I mean, I don't even have to ask, but I will. What do you think of this one?
Does the term cruel and unusual punishment mean anything to you?
So when you're listening to Cowboy Carter, one of the things I want you to think about as you're experiencing it is this album says, what would country sound like if the artists were also growing with Black gospel? If the artists were also growing with hip hop? If the artists were growing with R&B? Like, what would country sound like if country artists were also in community with these quote unquote Black genres? And what you see is a blending of genres happening from the very beginning. It's this idea of how these genres can blend together to do something really cool, connected to and rooted in their Blackness. But as country stands right now, like I said, it is a very white genre, which is one of the main thematics of this album. We see right away in American Requiem that Beyonce is laying out for us this central theme of, I used to speak to country, and then rejection came and said I wasn't country enough. So she's saying, I'm from Houston. I got folks in Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. This is my rootage. And then she goes on to say in interviews, like, she growing up growing to rodeos. Like, this is her rootage and her heritage. And she's saying, they used to tell me, oh, Beyonce just sounds so country. Like, if you go and watch really old Destiny's Child interviews, she borderline sounds like Glorilla. And it's really interesting to watch the media training kick in. Now, she has her moments where that country comes out, but she's saying they used to say I was too country. And then when she performed with the chicks at the CMAs, people were like, can't do that. Rejection came and said I wasn't country enough. And so the very nature of what she is attempting to do on this album, we can see in the thesis statement in American Requiem. I also think it's important to recognize what's happening musically and what's happening vocally on that song. First of all, musically, you get a whole range of instrumentation and you feel the gospel rootage of this song. And obviously it's a requiem. It's a song for a funeral. It's a song for the dead in essence. And so you get these major gospel moments. You also get some classically country moments from the guitar to the vocalizing, but also you get some explicitly black country language and lingo when she talks about look at there now, look at look. Like we get all of this right away. We get explicit blackness, connection to classic country music and connection to gospel music, and then the storytelling where she's outlining for us that what she's going to do on this album. She's going to talk about her experiences trying to break into country and break in as an artist as a whole and connect them to the black experience, not only in this country, but the black experience with music. And so she's doing this dual storytelling across this album. Is she's showing us through her own stories the larger image of what it looks like to be an artist who is black, who is navigating something that was black to begin with, but has been overtaken. And in the process, she's also going to have a very explicit critique of this country. And I think it's important to recognize when we talk about the critiques that are coming around it not being country enough, country music used to vocally critique this country. Country music used to be a way in which people who are disenfranchised by the systems and structures of this country, and let's be very clear, is poor white Southerners have been systematically disenfranchised by the systems of this country. Now, unfortunately, they consistently vote for the politicians who disenfranchise them, but that's for another podcast and another day. But country music used to be a way that those poor white Southerners could lift their voice and critique those systems. And what it has become is an agent of the state. The connecting point between Donald Trump and country music it's blurred now. And with that being the case, you're seeing on the other side what it looks like for Beyonce to step in and to reconnect not only that rootage of country in its critique, but that rootage of country in its explicit blackness. So over the course of this album, through 4 movements, what we're going to see is Beyonce tell us stories about herself that are also layered into stories about genre, that are also layered into stories about this nation. And right away, like I said, with American Requiem, we're not only getting the larger prologue of the album, where she's laying out the story, but we're beginning to see through her genre bending what she's trying to accomplish. And I would argue that the thesis statement for this entire album is that genre is a funny little thing, isn't it? This is something we hear Linda Martell say on Spaghetti, which fascinatingly enough, I've seen several videos of people saying like, oh, I'm going back and listening to Cowboy Carter to see if it's country. And they're pulling Spaghetti, which is fascinating because Spaghetti was nominated for Best Melodic Rap Performance at the Grammys, or it was submitted for consideration for Best Melodic Rap Performance. Beyonce doesn't think that Spaghetti is an explicitly country song, but the first line in the song Beyonce is doing is she is bending genres. Genres are artificial boxes that Beyonce is bursting across the album and pulling gospel, pulling R&B, pulling rock, pulling hip hop and country all together. She has the country as a foundation and she's pulling all these other genres. Like I said, it's a reimagining. What would it look like if country music still had black influences that were also still connected to these other genres? And that's what this album is. It's inventive in this way. So the idea of blending these different genres is explored, but it's not something that's new for country. Country is okay with this. So in addition to the videos I've seen where people have been listening to Spaghetti and saying, oh, see, this isn't country, I've seen a lot of people who are supporting Beyonce who are playing songs by Casey Musgrave or Lainey Wilson or Post Malone or Morgan Wallen that are pop or are disco. And it's like, is this country? Is this song right here? right? Like, look at there now. Look. Is that country? What are we saying? And it's important for us to recognize that while we're allowing those folks to bend genres, we're also allowing certain people access to country music. Because the immediate thing was, Beyonce doesn't need to come over to country music. She should stick over there with pop. But I want to remind everybody that Post Malone is a rapper. Post Malone, the only reason why we know Post Malone is because he had a rap career. And we were so okay with the melodic rapper transitioning into country music. But we are not okay with Beyonce doing it. Why? And I would argue it's partially because country music has a racism problem. Country music is a very white genre connected to Republican values so deeply that when the chicks critiqued George Bush, country music pushed them out. And so when you have that explicit of a connection to a political party, and you have a black woman who's not only a black woman, but who is also explicit in her political allegiances and alliances, she's explicit in talking about black lives and why they matter. When you have someone stepping in like that, it's easy to accept a Post Malone who used blackness in order to gain notoriety and then pivoted into explicit whiteness. But it is harder to bring in somebody like Beyonce into the country scene, and it is the bias associated with immediately saying that can't be good. And if you don't think biases are controlled, like can control your mind and your ears, there's a book called Mind Bugs, and then it examines this study that was done around why in the 70s there were virtually no women who were part of symphony orchestras. And what certain symphony orchestras started doing is hosting blind auditions. And what they found that as soon as they started hosting blind auditions, the percentages of women who made it into the symphony orchestras improved. And the question would be, was it just that women suddenly got better, or do you actually hear music specific to the biases you're socialized with? And for a lot of country folks, for a lot of country music fans, their bias is that white is right. And that anyone coming into country, because the reality is, when we get to Blackbird on this album, she is giving the ability for multiple black artists who are country artists to have notoriety that they might not have otherwise had. These black women already existed in country music, but weren't given their just due. And Beyonce comes in and says, not only will I break down this barrier, I'm gonna pull you along with me. Because country music is seen as such an explicitly white genre and has such deeply racist realities right now, even though its roots are blackness, that it takes someone like Beyonce to break down the barrier. And so this is the thematic for the album, which is why I've been saying to people, like, if you don't get it, I get it. It is an album so deeply rooted in such social themes that if you are approaching it from the perspective of just wanting to do a line dance, this might not be the record for you. But to say it's not country because it doesn't allow you to do that is disingenuous. So let's talk about a couple of the critiques that I've heard of the album. I heard one person say that the album is musically boring. Now, my immediate question when I saw that is I asked them what instrument they play or what instruments they play. Because as a person who plays music, there is so much happening on this album musically. Like I said, there's a lot of genre bending, and it's really hard to bend genres and do it well. Justin Timberlake, I think, has had a lot of great albums. A lot of great albums. Like 2020 Experience Part 1 is phenomenal, right? Like Future Sex Love Sounds, incredible album. Justified, great album. Man of the Woods, which on Man of the Woods, he basically said, I want to make like a country album with 808s. And he executed that, but it didn't execute well, which was hard for me to deal with because like Pharrell produced on it. But it is hard to just put two genres together and make them work. What we found across the entirety of this album is that not only was she making it work, she was giving the musicians the ability to do some incredible things and play within the confines of those multiple genres and bring each genre's instrumentation brings specific technicalities and skills to it. For example, I play piano and I play a very specific type of piano. I don't know that you're just going to get me up and I'm going to play jazz well, because there's technicality to it. There's a better example. I play the drums. And I remember the first gig I ever had as a rock drummer, the bass player told me to stop playing like a church drummer. And it made so much sense to me, but it didn't make sense until he said it. As I was approaching everything with this particular bend that church taught me. Like there's a flair that comes with church drumming. There's a way that you're gonna approach it where I'm like, it's like, there's like a driviness to it. And I had to be like, exact same beat. The two beats I just beatbox are the exact same beat. But the drive is different from to like, and I know it's a hi-hat opener close, and I know I'm getting slightly technical, but just rock with me for a second. There's something about the way that my hands have to hold the sticks that is different from rock and church drumming. And there's a way that the instrumentation simultaneously plays into these different genres. Bodyguard is probably my favorite song on the album. And that's a hard thing to say. It is, but I think the last movement of the album is the best part of the album. Like with Two Hands to Heaven and Honey Buckin' and Oh Louisiana. Like it's just, whoa, right? I also love Alligator Tears, but we'll get to that in a second. But I love Bodyguard because there's a airiness about the way that everything's played that feels very 60s to me. I played it for my grandma. And she was like, oh, this is nice, right? And it feels very 60s rock-esque, but the lyric feels older country. Like it's this beautiful blend. And so the musicality from American Requiem all the way through to Amen pays a lot of homage to gospel's influence on early country. It does a great job of being able to, when necessary, have these moments where like, oh, there goes Beyonce. There goes those 808s. That works. It plays into it well and executes it flawlessly. And if you talk to musicians will listen to that album and talk about the flawless execution of the musicianship on the album. So you could say, if you were to say it's musically boring, I'm also asking what you're comparing it to. And this is one of the things we'll get to at the back half of this episode. The albums we're talking about here, Hit Me Hard and Soft, which I love that album. Torture Poets Department, Short and Sweet. Okay, what was Chappell Roan's album name? I just forgot that. That's his, okay, Good Luck, babe. Okay. Chappell Roan's album. I'm sorry. Forgive me for that. And then of course there's the album by doggone it, I just forgot, Jacob Collier, right? And so when we look at these albums, are you really gonna sit here and tell me that the musicality of Hit Me Hard and Soft or Tortured Poets was better than the musicality on Cowboy Carter? I don't think you actually believe that. Now you might say the music sold more, it was streamed more, and that's a whole nother conversation. We talk about, is that the point of art? Is this who we are? Is this what we're about? Because if that's the case, then like Will Smith should have a ton of Oscars. He owned like 12 straight summers. Owning a summer, having a Brat summer does not equate to having the best album. And one of the things that I saw in this Grammys is that innovation was rewarded. And I love that as an artist. I love that as a musician. I love that as a producer. I love that as a fan. Like, we're not going to be in the space of just repeating the same things over and over again. And so the musicality is out of this world. And I think that it is miles above what else was nominated in some of these categories, just because of what the musicians were allowed to pull off. And then there's the vocal performance. And I just want to throw out there, you can't possibly tell me that the vocal performance on this album is not crazy. I mean, what Beyonce is doing vocally is wild. She's singing with twang at times. She's yodeling. She's singing opera. She's rapping. She's scatting. The harmonies across this album are rich and full. And so vocally, she's doing something that no one else is doing on their records. The range of what she's pulling off vocally is out of this world. So from a technical standpoint, the music is incredible, the singing is incredible, and then we get to the storytelling. And I saw someone say like, Taylor and Billy put together comprehensive works. And I would argue that they were both telling stories, but over the course of 27 tracks, Beyonce in 4 movements is telling a 3-layered story about I'll speak from the eye, who I am in music, who she is in music, what it means to be country and rejected, and what this country believes about Black folks. I think that the story that Billie told is incredible. I love Hit Me Hard and Soft. It's a phenomenal album. The number of times that I've burst out into those songs is crazy. But I should also note, just because you weren't listening to it doesn't mean I'm not walking around every day going, look at that horse, look at that horse, look at that horse, look at that horse. Right? Like the idea of the individualistic, it wasn't multi-platinum in my car means that it wasn't a good album is crazy work. So technically speaking, it's musically far and above everything else that was nominated in both the country album category and the album of the year category. Vocally, it is far and above anything that anybody else is doing. From a storytelling standpoint and lyrical standpoint, it is far and above, which, speaking of lyrical content, I've seen this meme floating around how many writers each album of the year had. And, oh my gosh, Beyonce had 72. Now, first of all, this is completely disingenuous. The entire conversation is disingenuous. Like the idea of like somehow Beyonce is less of an artist. Beyonce was giving us a dissertation on the history of Blackness in not only music, but America. Beyonce has gone out of her way to over-credit people. If you're in the room and you whistle something, you're getting credit. If you were on the writing team of a thing that she decides to interpolate, you're getting credit. If you were there in the room and you're like, well, what if the vocal arrangement goes here? You're getting credit. She over-credits people. And what I've seen on my feed the last couple of days is people who were given writing credits on the album now have a Grammy. Think about that for a second. Think about the opportunities that are now available to these writers, some of whom are artists themselves who can now say, I'm a Grammy Award winner. She's over-crediting and she wants to ensure that she's nailing this thing. So it's a disingenuous argument to begin with. Beyonce goes above and beyond, and like she's doing a master's thesis, and I don't see anyone getting mad at TV shows or movies for doing this. And even more so, because I know as a person who's in the hip hop community, talks about hip hop a ton, and obviously I've talked about Drake a ton, and just so you know, I'm excited for Monday because I wanted to talk about Drake and Kendrick today, but on Monday I'm going to talk about everything from the Kendrick Grammy wins to Drake whining while he's on tour in Australia and the new music he's got coming out, and talking about the interview that Kendrick just did leading up to the Super Bowl and then doing an analysis of the Super Bowl performance. That's going to come on Monday. But for today, as a hip hop fan, one of the critiques of Drake is that, he uses ghostwriters who can't be a great MC. If Drake was crediting the writers, we wouldn't have a problem. Beyonce is going above and beyond to credit these folks, and now we're moving the goalposts and saying, you got too many people. And which is crazy because some of the albums we're talking about, and specifically, and I've said this very publicly, I think Tortured Poets needs more writers. I just do. I think it needed more editors, more voices, more people in the space to maybe cut some of it back. Whereas this expansive of a work, yes, it has a lot of writers because of what it's looking to accomplish. But it's disingenuous to pretend like that makes it less of an album or her less deserving, because this is what she does. And I'm glad that she does it this way. As a person who writes, as a person who produces, everyone gets a piece of the pie. She's gotten to the point in her career where she's not beholden to saying, I need to keep as much of the publishing as possible. She's willing to include as many people as possible in order to ensure that everybody wins. So she's so intentional about how she does this, and they were intentional about the storytelling itself and the way that it intricately tells these stories using multiple Black voices, right? Whether it's Tanner Adele or Shabuzi or Linda Martell, pulling in Dolly Parton, pulling in Willie Nelson. She's intentional about how she's going about doing this. And so given the musicality, given the lyrical content, given the vocal space, it clears all the other albums I heard this year. Now, if you're saying it's too much, that's a you thing. You don't want something that's expansive. You don't want something that's crazy artistic. I've been having the same argument with people about Kendrick's music, right? I have had the same conversation with people about jazz, right? You can say, I don't want that, and that's awesome. You want something that doesn't require as much, and that's great. But to pretend like what requires something is less is wild. So people are saying that it's not country are actually proving the point of the album. That's the point of the album. She's saying, you're not going to let me be country because you've decided that I can't be. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do it anyway. People were saying this doing too much of proving the point because that's just not your palate. And you are not the type of consumer who can actually handle art. People were saying that it's not for them or proving the point. It doesn't have to be for you. And this is where the critiques around like white folks saying, I don't get it. I'm like, of course you don't. You've been socialized not to see black stories. She tells the story of blackness in a series of songs. And you are not socialized to see blackness expressed in this way. You're socialized to see white people as main characters. That's what white supremacy has taught you. And so the reason why many of us immediately go to racism when you say it's not country or it's not good. We go to racism because you are saying that a black story with a black voice is inferior, which is white supremacy. Now, if you're like, hey, it wasn't really my cup of tea, you know what you could really do if it wasn't your cup of tea? Shut up. Don't talk about it. It's really that simple. But y'all are doing it to parade your white supremacy, your ignorance, your racism. Because you actually don't understand it, because you don't want to understand it, because the story exposes something in you. As opposed to taking a step back and being like, is this movie technically great? I mean, there are people who love The Dark Knight more than they love movies by, Stanley Kubrick, or more than they love movies by Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson films are a very specific type of film. And you might be like, oh, I like Michael Bay films. That's dope. Like Michael Bay films, but don't pretend like Michael Bay films are better than Wes Anderson films. They're not better. Wes Anderson is telling better stories with better acting and better set pieces. And he's getting at something really incredible. And to sit back and pretend like it's better no, you just like it more. There's a difference between the two. And on the internet, we really need to learn the difference between I like it more and it's better. Ultimately, Beyonce is proving with this win that innovation will always supersede stagnation. And with all due respect to the other nominees, pop music has become stagnant. What each person up there did not move the needle of music in the way that Cowboy Carter completely disrupted what we know about music. It was disruptive, it was executed beautifully, its musicality was rich, its vocal ability was out of control. It tells a compelling story. It bends genres. It does all the things that a great piece of art should do. And the need to dismiss it, once again, is rooted in white supremacy. But pivoting from white supremacy for a second, can we just talk about internalized misogyny and misogynoir in particular? Because the Jay-Z paid for this. Jay-Z got up on stage and whined, and now the same people who will say that Jay-Z got up on stage and whined and now there's all this success don't like it when you say that Kanye cut off Taylor and Taylor's been riding the success of that since. I don't personally believe that, but I know that's a theory that a lot of people have. Regardless of what Jay-Z got up there and said, Cowboy Carter was the best album of the year. But to believe that Beyonce's success can only be attributed to a man is misogyny. And even deeper so, let's examine what you're really getting at here. Is you're undermining her talent, you're undermining her success, even though she's technically more successful than him. And you're also failing to look at her white counterparts, because can we just acknowledge Billie Eilish, all of her music is written by Phineas. Taylor Swift and Sabrina Carpenter both had their albums done by Jack Antonoff. So 3 of the albums that we're talking about that people thought should have won are there's a white man directly responsible for them. So if we're going to sit here and say, oh, it's only because of Jay-Z, great. It's only because of Jack Antonoff. It's only because of Phineas O'Connell. Is that okay? Is that cool? Are you okay with that? Because I know I'm not. I'm not okay with saying that. I think Sabrina Carpenter is immensely talented, and she put out a phenomenal album, and she's crushing it on tour. I think that Taylor Swift is a powerhouse, and she continues to consistently put out the type of music that her fans need and want and love. I thought Hit Me Hard and Soft was an incredible album. I thought it was the second best album of the year. I thought it should have won Best Pop Vocal Album. Those things can all be true. But the white supremacy and the internalized misogyny that plays itself into these critiques of Beyonce has to be examined. And so this is my best advice. If you are a white person and you sat and listened to Cowboy Carter start to finish, and your takeaway was, it's just not really my cup of tea, I don't really get it. Keep that to yourself. It's more of an admission on your part than it is a critique of Beyonce. If you're sitting back and saying, I think that Taylor should have won because she had the most streamed album, I would like to remind you that this is not the Billboard Awards. These are the Grammys. If you're sitting back and you're saying, I just wish that, a real country album would have won, I would like you to sit with what you think real country is and why you think Beyonce isn't it, but Post Malone is. Keith Urban, the guy from Australia, why is he allowed to be in? Shania Twain from Canada, why is she allowed to be in and Beyonce's not? Sit with that. Think about it. Well, don't pull the race card. They're a black artist. Do you listen to them? And who do they have to be in order to survive in those country spaces? Sit with that. Think about it. Because all the thoughts that are going to come up for you was the thesis and the statement that Beyonce was making over 27 tracks on Cowboy Carter. And ultimately, regardless of how much you hate it, it's the album of the year. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.